We are beginning an exploration today into the source material around a really profound and heartbreaking American tragedy.
We are.
And our focus is going to be a careful look at the documents we have concerning the life and death of Yetunde Price. It's a story that, it sits at this strange intersection of global celebrity, of fierce personal independence, and just the devastating randomness of violence in a community.
That's precisely the ground we need to cover. We have a detailed stack of documents here on Yetunde Price, who was born August 9th, 1972, and was murdered on September 14, 2003. Our analysis is going to focus not just on the facts of the crime itself, but on the very complex legal process that followed and the lasting legacy she left, especially for her family and for the city of Compton.
And right from the outset, we know Yetunde Price holds this unique place in our culture. She was the oldest half-sister and, at different times, a personal assistant to the tennis icons Venus and Serena Williams. Her life story is just fascinating because of that proximity to fame, but as the sources show, it's really defined by her own choices to remain grounded.
And we really have to establish the core fact that's going to guide this entire analysis. Yetunde Price was murdered. Her cause of death was a gunshot wound inflicted by Robert E. Maxfield in Compton, California. So we're reviewing sources that treat her life and the circumstances of her death with the objective gravity and the detail they absolutely require.
Okay, so let's unpack the individual Yetunde Price was, because the source material, it paints a portrait of incredible self-determination that, it's sometimes hard to reconcile with her family's global status. She was clearly a deeply independent woman.
To really appreciate her story, you absolutely have to understand her place within that family structure. The sources identify her as the oldest of Orsine Price's 5 daughters. And crucially, she was a half-sibling to Venus and Serena Williams, meaning she was born during Orsine Price's previous marriage to a man named Yusuf Rashid. This detail is important because, while they were clearly a very close and supportive family unit, Yetunde established her own financial and professional footing very early on.
And that professional life is where that contrast, or what seems like a contradiction, it really starts to surface. She wasn't just a dependent family member living off that fame. Her resume, which is detailed in these sources, shows she was juggling 3 major roles. It just demonstrates an incredible dedication and an entrepreneurial spirit.
Indeed, she was a working registered nurse, which is a profession that demands immense skill and a lot of emotional labor.
Sure.
She was also the owner of a hair salon. And that really speaks to her commitment to her local community and just a desire for business independence. And yes, alongside those 2 very demanding careers, she also performed duties as a personal assistant to her sisters. The complexity of balancing those 3 distinct professional identities it's really telling.
I find that commitment to nursing and her salon particularly illuminating. It suggests that even though she had access to extraordinary wealth, to global connections through her family, she was determined to forge a path that was entirely her own. A path rooted firmly in the kind of work that serves the public directly.
That is the essential insight here. In 2003, the year of her death, she was certainly fulfilling that personal assistant role. The sources confirm she traveled, she appeared at major international events like Wimbledon, placing her squarely in that gilded world of elite tennis. But at the same time, she was maintaining her working life back in the suburbs of Los Angeles.
And the media reports at the time, they focused heavily on this powerful contrast, and our sources really echo it. They note her absolute commitment to paying her own way. She was described as determined to pay her own way in the world, even while, naturally accepting some financial assistance from her sisters. That detail just highlights a deep pride in self-sufficiency.
And that self-sufficiency, it dictated where she lived and worked. She continued to reside with her 3 children in their family home. And the sources specifically locate that home in what they describe as a rundown district of Compton. She hadn't moved to some highly secured, exclusive enclave that you might associate with celebrity wealth. She remained rooted, and she kept working as a nurse.
That choice to stay in the community, to maintain her demanding work schedule, and to raise her children in what was a challenging environment despite her sister's fame, it's crucial. It underscores her grounded nature, but tragically, it also places her squarely in the geographical and the socioeconomic context that led to her death.
Exactly.
She was committed to her community, and it was in that community that this random act of violence claimed her life.
It's a profound study in contradiction. Here's a life lived straddling the global glamour of the Williams name, and on the other hand, the gritty reality of South Los Angeles. And this grounding has to be acknowledged. The sources establish Yetunde Price as a mother of 3 children whose life was just tragically and senselessly cut short. That loss, it defines the magnitude of this event.
It is a devastating collision of worlds. Her dedication to that independence and her commitment to remaining where she grew up, caring for her family through her own efforts, it unintentionally set the stage for the tragic circumstances we have to detail from September 2003.
It did.
So we now have to move to the difficult task of reconstructing the events of September 14th, 2003. The setting and the details in the sources, they just illustrate how random and how immediate the danger was that night.
The setting is absolutely critical for understanding what happened in the legal proceedings later on. It was the night of September 14, 2003. Yetunde Price was sitting in her Chevrolet SUV, parked in suburban Compton, just having a routine conversation with her boyfriend.
And what turned this very everyday moment into a tragedy was the specific location. They were parked outside a building that was later identified in court proceedings as a crack house.
Right.
And this structure was operating in a neighborhood plagued by territorial gang conflict, which turned the vehicle parked completely innocently outside into a target.
And the violence that erupted was entirely unprovoked by Price or her boyfriend. The sources identify the perpetrators as 2 members of the Southside Compton Crips street gang. They were acting as guards for that drug house, and their actions were driven entirely by a culture of territorial defense.
So the immediate cause of the gunfire was just a pure, fatal misidentification. The prosecution's theory, which held up through the subsequent trials, was that the gang members opened fire on the SUV because they mistakenly believed the vehicle and its occupants were defending the crack house from gangland rivals.
And this brings the notorious gang dynamics of Compton directly into play. The rival gang they feared was presumed to be the Lime Hood Piru gang. So for the Southside Compton Crips, any unknown vehicle just lingering near their operational territory was viewed through this lens of extreme paranoia and perceived threat.
And Yetunde Price and her boyfriend were simply in the wrong place at the absolute worst time.
The sources clarify that the SUV came under immediate fire. Yetunde Price suffered a bullet wound to the head. And it's important to understand the immediate chaos in that vehicle after the shots were fired. The sources indicate that her boyfriend, who was driving, later testified that he didn't immediately realize that Yetunde had been shot, which really speaks to the speed, the noise, the sheer panic of a drive-by incident like that.
So instead of calling 911 right away, he drove her away from the scene.
He did. That decision, and you can imagine it was made in panic or profound shock, was to drive her to a relative's home, probably seeking a safe, familiar environment. But this detour unfortunately meant that precious life-saving minutes were lost before proper medical attention was sought.
Emergency services were finally called from that relative's residence. Yetunde Price was rushed to the hospital, but tragically, due to the severity of the bullet wound, she was pronounced dead shortly after she arrived.
The utter senselessness of this crime is just reinforced by the crucial legal consensus that formed immediately afterward. Both the prosecution and the defense, despite their adversarial roles, they agreed on one fundamental fact during the subsequent trial. And that fact was that Yetunde Price was an innocent victim passing through the area.
That consensus is so vital. It definitively established that she was not involved in any illegal activity, any gang activity, or any kind of rivalry. She was an independent working mother, caught in a crossfire that was intended for someone else, or more accurately, intended for no one in particular, just a perceived threat to a territorial boundary.
And this shared understanding, it framed the difficult and very protracted legal battle that was to come.
It really sets the baseline for the next part of our analysis. A search for accountability in a crime that was ultimately defined by random violence and mistaken identity.
Yes, it does.
So moving into the legal consequences, the source material review is that the pursuit of justice was neither swift nor easy. It was characterized by complexity, highly technical legal maneuvering, and 2 really challenging mistrials.
The primary defendant who was identified was Robert Edward Maxfield, a member of the Southside Compton Crips street gang. He was 25 years old at the time he was eventually convicted. His conviction, however, only came after significant judicial strain.
In Maxfield's case, it really highlights the inherent difficulty the justice system faces when dealing with this kind of random violence and potentially confusing evidence. The sources confirmed 2 mistrials because of deadlocked juries before a resolution was finally reached.
Let's examine those deadlocks closely because they tell us a lot about the defense strategy. The first trial took place in November of 2004. It ended with a highly fractured jury split. 6 jurors voted for acquittal, 5 for guilt, and 1 remained completely undecided.
Wow.
And this split suggests the defense successfully introduced significant doubt concerning Maxfield's culpability. Specifically, whether he was the one who fired the fatal shot or whether intent could be proven for a crime based on mistaken identity.
A 6 to 5 to 1 split, I mean, that's fascinating in a murder case. It means that half the jury felt the prosecution just hadn't met the burden of proof. Maybe they believed Maxfield was present but not necessarily the primary aggressor, or that the confusion of the moment just mitigated the level of the offense.
It's exactly. The defense likely focused heavily on muddying the waters around the issue of intent. They were probably arguing that the shooters genuinely believed they were defending themselves against a rival gang threat, even if that belief was tragically fatally wrong. And this can shift a potential conviction from first-degree murder, which requires premeditation, down toward lesser charges, like voluntary manslaughter, which acknowledges sudden passion or mistaken defense.
Then the second trial followed, taking place in April 2005. This time, the jury came much closer to a conviction, but still failed to deliver a unanimous verdict.
That's right. The second mistrial was declared on April 29, 2005, after the jury deadlocked at 11 to 1 in favor of conviction.
So close.
This new unanimous verdict signals that 11 of the 12 jurors were convinced of Maxfield's guilt. It suggests the prosecution had strengthened its case considerably between the trials, perhaps through better witness testimony or ballistics analysis.
That 11 to 1 deadlock must have placed immense psychological and strategic pressure on the defense team. I mean, facing an overwhelming likelihood of conviction in a third trial, the Maxfield team made a crucial strategic decision.
They did. Maxfield ultimately pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter on March 22, 2006. And the sources confirm this decision was made just one day before his third trial was scheduled to begin.
We should probably just briefly explain the importance of pleading no contest. Legally, it's treated the same as a guilty plea for sentencing purposes, but it carries a significant strategic advantage for the defendant.
The strategic benefit is massive, yes. Pleading no contest or nolo contender, it allows the defendant to accept the conviction and the punishment without formally admitting guilt in a criminal court.
So why is that so important?
Because that criminal conviction can't be used as an automatic admission of guilt in any subsequent civil lawsuit that might be brought by the victim's family. So for the defense, it was a way to manage their client's exposure to future civil litigation, while ensuring he avoided the potential life sentence of a murder conviction in a third trial.
It brings a sense of pragmatic closure to a case that had just resisted resolution for years. We also need to note the involvement of a second individual who was initially charged alongside Maxfield.
Right. A second defendant was initially charged with murder. This was based on the assumption that he too had fired a handgun during the incident. However, after the complex evidence was presented in that first trial, the charge against the second individual was dismissed.
The authorities concluded that the second defendant did not cause the fatal wound to Yetunde Price.
Correct. And this detail effectively narrowed the focus, confirming Robert E. Maxfield as the individual responsible for the lethal shot that killed Yetunde Price.
So following that no contest plea, Maxfield proceeded to sentencing.
On April 6, 2006, Judge Stephen Suzukawa sentenced him to 15 years in state prison with the possibility of parole. This sentence aligns with the charge of voluntary manslaughter, and it provided the family and the community a legal measure of accountability, even if it was delayed and very difficult to obtain.
The legal chapter was closed, but the repercussions for the family, they were really only just beginning. The ripples of Yetunde Price's death have extended far beyond the courtroom. They've manifested in artistic memorials, in institutional efforts towards healing, and in this intensely personal trauma years later. The community response in Compton alone speaks volumes about her presence there.
It does. Yetunde's story resonated deeply within that community, especially concerning the tragedy of innocent bystanders caught in these gang conflicts. A very notable public tribute came from the Compton native and rapper The Game. He dedicated his 2005 song Dreams to her memory. And this memorial helped to cement her death as a symbol of the senseless violence that was plaguing the city.
That tribute is so powerful, connecting the personal tragedy of the Williams family to the wider cultural narrative of Compton. But the most significant, and I think lasting response from the family has been the creation of a physical sanctuary for those affected by similar violence, the Yetunde Price Resource Center.
The Williams sisters established this center in Compton in 2016. That's roughly 13 years after Yetunde's murder. And its location is highly intentional. It's in the heart of the community where she lived and died. Its mission is specific. It's a community center dedicated to victims of violence and their families.
The founding of this center is just an extraordinary act of transforming grief into constructive purpose. It takes a devastating personal loss and channels it into a structural mechanism for community support. The center's tagline, "Committed to helping others heal," provides a really powerful summary of the family's long-term response to this tragedy. It's institutional healing, created out of private pain.
It's a profound example of resilience. It shows how the family chose to honor Yetunde's memory not by leaving the community where she died, but by investing in his recovery. However, the sources also document a later event that violently disrupted this process of institutional healing, an event that brought the raw, personal pain right back to the surface. And that's the timeline surrounding the killer's parole.
This timeline is so crucial because it illustrates that the legal chapter of accountability, that 15-year sentence, it did not equate to emotional closure for the family. Robert E. Maxfield was released on parole from the dual vocational institution in Tracy, California on March 8, 2018. He had served approximately 12 years of his sentence.
So the system had run its course and Maxfield was back in the community after a little over a decade. But the sources provide a further vital detail. Later in 2018, Maxfield was subsequently rearrested for violating his parole terms.
So his initial period of freedom was short-lived.
Very short-lived. It signals an immediate non-compliance with the rules set by the judicial and correctional authorities upon his release.
And this leads us to the deeply personal anecdote that Serena Williams shared, which just perfectly captures the emotional instability this protracted saga inflicted on the family, even 15 years later.
In an interview with Time magazine, Serena Williams provided a level of detail that brings the long-term emotional toll into sharp focus. She recounted learning about Maxfield's release on July 31st, 2018. And the circumstances were just shocking. She learned the news only 10 minutes before she was due to play her professional tennis match against Johanna Konta at the Silicon Valley Classic.
To think about the jarring nature of that moment, you are preparing mentally and physically for a globally broadcast athletic performance, a moment that requires peak focus, and 10 minutes before you walk out on the court, you receive news on social media, of all places, that the man who murdered your sister is walking free.
It is an immediate, devastating collision of professional life and deeply rooted personal trauma.
And the result of that collision, it speaks volumes. Serena Williams, one of the greatest athletes in history, went on to lose that match decisively. It was a punishing 6-1, 6-0 defeat to Konta in just 52 minutes.
Given her established dominance and fierce competitive drive, that outcome is highly unusual. It provides a tangible public measure of the profound emotional disruption that was caused by the news of Maxfield's release. The information was instantly destabilizing.
It demonstrates that even when justice has been served, and even when positive actions like creating the resource center have been taken, the trauma is just constant presence. It's ready to re-erupt violently at the worst possible moment.
Right.
The fact that the news was delivered via Instagram just underscores the modern random way that deeply personal trauma can surface, entirely outside the control of the victim's family.
The timing is heartbreaking. It shows that for the victim's family, the wounds of violence are not merely historical facts that were addressed by a court. They are continuous living experiences that can destabilize them professionally and personally decades later.
As we bring this extensive analysis of the source material to a conclusion, let's synthesize the journey we've taken, focusing on the factual and emotional clarity we've achieved through this exploration.
We meticulously examined Yetunde Price's life. We characterized her as an independent force, a dedicated nurse, a salon owner, a mother of 3, committed to living and working in Compton, separate from that rarefied world of her sister's fame. And that dedication was both admirable and, in the end, tragically consequential.
We chronicled the horrifying events of September 14th, 2003, detailing the random mistaken violence carried out by members of the Southside Compton Crips gang who misidentified her vehicle near crack houses belonging to rivals. And we reaffirmed that critical, agreed-upon fact. Yetunde Price was an innocent victim passing through the area.
Our analysis of the legal process highlighted the complexity and the difficulty of the case. It was marked by 2 mistrials, one split, 6-5-1, the second deadlocked 11-1, before Robert E. Maxfield chose that strategic route of pleading no contest to voluntary manslaughter, and that led to his 15-year sentence. This legal path really underscored the challenges of proving intent in cases that are rooted in territorial misidentification.
Finally, we connected all of this to the long-term repercussions of the crime. This included the cultural tribute by the game and the institutional healing embodied by the Yetunde Price Resource Center, which was established in 2016 to support victims of violence. We deliberately contrasted this formal healing with the raw emotional disruption caused by Robert E. Maxwell's parole and rearrest timeline, illustrated so vividly by Serena Williams' immediate public inability to perform following that news.
And the source material consistently maintains factual clarity. It focuses the entire narrative squarely on the senselessness of a crime that victimized an innocent person simply living and working in her community.
So, if we look at the whole picture, the institutional response versus the personal one, the sources offer a profound contrast that, it leaves us with a provocative thought for reflection.
Consider the Yetunde Price Resource Center. It's an organization purposefully built and funded to provide structure, support, and a definitive path for helping others heal. It is a dedicated, rational effort to process chaos. Now, you have to starkly contrast that institutional purpose with the impulsive, highly public, and emotionally devastating way in which Serena Williams learned about the killer's parole, via a notification just minutes before she had to deliver a high-stakes performance.
What does this fundamental difference between the organized, dedicated process of community healing on one hand and the sudden, random re-eruption of individual destabilizing trauma on the other? What does that reveal about the difficulty, perhaps even the impossibility, of truly closing the chapter on acts of violence for those who survived them? Can institutional healing ever fully absorb the lingering sting of personal loss? That is a compelling question for you to consider.
It raises an important question about how trauma and accountability operate in tandem, regardless of whether the legal system or community efforts succeed.
We appreciate you taking this time to explore this complex and sensitive material with us.
We trust this detailed analysis has provided you with the necessary context and understanding surrounding this profound tragedy.
Thanks for listening.